Hi, good morning everyone, and welcome to Princeton Public Library. Happy 2024, everybody. My name is Janie Herman, and I'm the manager of adult programming. It is my great pleasure to introduce our author and moderator for the book Brunch this morning. But first, a few housekeeping notes. Please note that this room is equipped with a hearing loop that pairs with T-coil technology. So if you require hearing assistance, you can take advantage of that. If you need headphones, they are available for your convenience. If you should need them, they're over there on the piano bench. We kindly ask that you silence electronic devices during the talk and hold your questions until the end, as there will be a chance for audience Q&A after the main presentation. We want to extend our thanks to Labyrinth Books of Princeton for being our bookseller for today, and also to the team at Celadon Books for all their assistance with arrangements for today. A book signing will take place immediately following the program. So we are so thrilled to have Amy Jo Burns with us this morning as our first author event of 2024. I almost said 2023 there. I had 2023 on my paper, so I was like, whoopsie. It is a perfect way for us to kick off the year. And it also feels very full circle, as it was 1 year ago, also on the first Sunday of January, that Amy Jo was here with us in this very room to interview Frederick Bachman during his tour for The Winners, the third book of his Beartown trilogy. So you know that the videotape of that that's on our YouTube channel, the recording is on our YouTube channel, has nearly 5,000 views as of today. It was a wonderful conversation filled with humor and insight. If you haven't seen it yet, I suggest you go and find it. Joining Amy Jo today as the moderator is her very good friend, and Anika Moroz-Risi, who should be noted is also a very good friend to us here at the library. Anika is the award-winning author of more than a dozen books for kids and teens, including picture books, chapter books, middle grade, and YA, and she has appeared here at PPL many times, including being a regular at our annual Princeton Children's Book Festival. And when she's not busy writing or teaching, she plays fiddle and writes lyrics for the local band Owen Lake and the Tragic Loves, who also make regular appearances at the Unruly Sounds Festival. So Nika is no stranger to probably many in this room or to the community. So this event is the book launch for Mercury, Amy Jo's latest and much anticipated novel, a heartfelt family drama that tells the story of how a roofing family's bonds of loyalty are tested when they uncover a secret at the heart of their blue-collar town. It was published just earlier this week on Tuesday to much buzz and fanfare, and is garnering much recognition, including being selected by People magazine as one of the best new books to read in January 2024, being a Barnes & Noble January Book Club pick, and also a Best Book of January 2024 for the American Booksellers Indie Next List, among other authors, including being reviewed in the New York Times. Wow. So this is Amy Jo's second novel, her first being Shiner, and prior to that she published a memoir called Cinderland. So as I sat at the keyboard trying to figure out the best way to introduce Mercury, I realized that the perfect way to do this would be to read what was written by Matthew Quick, New York Times bestselling author of the Silver Linings Playbook. So he had read the manuscript and agreed to make a blurb for Amy Jo. Now Amy Jo was the moderator for an event held at PPL in November 2022 when Matthew appeared here for his book, We Are the Light. So you may be sensing a pattern here. Amy Jo is not only a wonderful writer, but also one of the library's go-to people when we need a thoughtful and engaging moderator for author events. It's one of the many reasons why we are just so excited to have Amy Jo here for her own book launch. So Matthew Quick wrote, Mercury shimmers with authenticity. Amy Jo Burns is a big-time talent whose beautiful and honest prose elevates love, even when plumbing the darker realities of family. Equal parts gripping page-turner and wise character study. Tears streamed down my face as I turned the last page. An instant favorite. So,
I also want to say, I think that event is also on your YouTube channel.
yes.
Matthew Quick, oh my gosh. He was amazing.
Yeah,
That's
he is-
another great one to watch,
Yeah.
for sure.
So many of our staff agree with Matthew's assessment that this novel is an instant favorite. So without further ado, let's welcome Amy Jo and Nika.
Hi, Anika.
For those who don't know, I'm just going to give a little preamble to let you know that Amy Jo and I met 9.5 years ago.
What?
I looked it up.
Ah.
It was a little bit before I moved to Princeton,
Mhm.
and it was about 2 months before your first book, Cinderland, came out.
Oh, wow.
And we had a tea date about 500 feet from here.
Yes.
And I got to hear pieces of how your brain works and how you think about story and craft and just being a human being in the world.
Mhm.
And that date made me feel like, okay, moving to the middle of New Jersey might actually be wonderful if I get to be friends with you.
Yes, New Jersey.
And since then, our friendship has grown over
Yeah.
the course of many lunch dates and dinner dates and tea dates and texts and long looping parks around a park where we talk about everything. From our creative fears and ambitions and questions and setbacks to our triumphs, as well as just our lives in general. So I'm so excited to continue that conversation here with you today. Thank you, Janie and Princeton Public Library and all of you for being here to be part of it. First, just tell us about this book. What is Mercury and what were the first things that you knew about it? Where did this idea start for you?
Sure. I want to say, before I answer that question, that Anika was the first person ever to read this manuscript. So when I had finished it and I wasn't sure if it was anything, she was the person that I trusted with it. And so she was the person who kind of helped bring this book into the world. So it is really special to get to share this with you. And I mean, I'm sure you have all heard me say, writers know what it is to read to an empty room. So I don't take this for granted. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming out. If I cry, I apologize. I feel like it's right here. You know, it's like the tears are like right here. So I'm going to try to hold it together. But this means the world to me. Thank you so much for coming. I could not ask for a better literary community than what Janie and people at this library have built. So this is a real honor and pleasure for me. And getting to do it with Anika, my husband Matt asked me, are you nervous? And I said, it's Anika, so I don't need to be nervous. So thank you again for coming out on a questionably rainy day. I really appreciate it. But to answer your question, so Mercury, I mean, there's a lot of answers to where this story came from, but I would say two things. I would say the first is that when I started to write this book in August of 2022, I think it was, and I know when it was because I had just finished working on a project for 2 years that I was so into, had thought I had finished and thought it was so good, and it sort of fell apart. So I was crushed, and that happens to writers a lot. I think it happens to humans a lot, where you sort of like invest a huge part of yourself into something, and then it falls apart. And so, and for writers, that it's very common that's years of your life, and then you just feel like this might not be the time for this project, or maybe it was something I just need to write for myself. So I was very down, and I was sort of like, maybe the best is behind me, I don't know. So I had the afternoon to myself, and I sat down with my pencil, and I just thought, what if I just write something that's for me? It doesn't have to be something anybody else wants to read, just something that's going to make me feel good again, so I can sort of remind myself why I chose this life. And I sat down and I wrote the first scene of the book, which is, there's a character, he's a roofer, and he is hiding behind the bleachers in his small town Little League field, and he's smoking a cigarette, and he's hiding from his wife. And I just wrote that scene, and that scene ended up being the first part of the book. And at that point I thought, this is just a writing exercise, it's not going to turn into a book. But I wrote one scene, and I wrote another, and another, and another, and then this. I mean, it's very rare for me, I don't know if you're this way, but for a story to sort of like, when I write it, I start in one place and I end in another, and it stays in that order. This is the only thing I've ever written where I did that. I sort of wrote from beginning to end. And it just, I think because I was in such a like uncertain place, and feeling like, I don't know, maybe I need to remind myself what it means to just write for me, that's what this project became. Just reminding myself like why I do this, why I love it. That sort of is like the writery answer. But where this book came from, so it is the story of a family of roofers in 1990. If you can picture, the 1990s, Mariah Carey is on the radio, Steffi Graf is playing Wimbledon, that sort of thing, Arsenio Hall, like all those great things from the 90s. That's where the book is set. It is about a family of roofers who, they're on a roofing job and they uncover something that they shouldn't, that's in an attic, church attic. and then that sort of sends their whole family into a very necessary tailspin. So the inspiration for the book then is that I come from a family of roofers. So this is my uncles, my dad, my brother, my grandfather. They are all roofers. And so that was like the family business when I was growing up. And probably what you don't know about roofers is that they are incredible storytellers. You will never find a funnier person, a more honest person, somebody who just knows how to land a joke. And I thought, if I want to write another book, I'm going to tell this story the way that they would. And that is why the book is sort of written the way that it is I thought, if they taught me how to write stories. I think before I even thought maybe I could write a book one day, I learned how to tell stories from them. So that was sort of like the heart and the meaning behind it. And I think one of the funniest things about hearing like my dad and my brother and my uncles talk about roofing is they will always say, like we'll be driving through town and they'll point to something and they'll say, let me tell you what went wrong on that roof. and it's just so entertaining. And it's entertaining because you kind of know, well, obviously they fixed it, right? And it's things like, you know, rain coming through in a grocery store into the cereal aisle, you know, spilling like hot tar all over the sidewalk. I mean, they just have all kinds of stories like that. And I think what I took from that is that we all screw up and then we fix it. And I think that's something everybody can relate to, this idea of like, you know, maybe we did screw up about something and then we fixed it. So this story is about a family who's like, we screwed up and can we fix it?
I love that. I love that this started as a book for you, because even though this is not your story, there is so much of you that as your friend I see in that, ooh, this
yeah.
is, right? Including that it's about a family of roofers and you are from a family of roofers, and that it's set in a small blue-collar town in Pennsylvania of the sort that you grew up in. Mm-hmm. I know from my own work that sometimes when I'm writing something I'm that close to, that I know that well, it's the hardest actually to capture, because you're too close, and there's so much fear of getting it wrong. And you'll know if it's wrong, and the people that you love will know if it's wrong.
I've been getting texts. We're from home, we've read it. So they have opinions.
And yet at the same time, you know, those foundational things, the fact that this is a story of roofers and the setting itself, this story could not exist without those things, right?
Yes.
The characters shaped this setting, and this setting shaped these characters. It couldn't be set somewhere else. They could not have other lives or other jobs. This is who they are. And the novel goes into that in amazing ways. And I just would love for you to talk about the process of trying to capture that on the page. What research did you have to do about these things that you already knew so well, yet trying to get them down in someone else's story? How did you go about building that, the roofing research and building the town itself on the page?
Yeah, so you know, my first book, Cinderland, was a memoir, and I renamed my hometown. My hometown's name is Mercer, and in that book I renamed it Mercury. And when I started writing this story, I had no question in my mind that it had to be set in this town, because so much of it, like you said, is like, well, I know roofers, and the roofers I know, they live in this town, and so much of who you are, I think, is reflected in the landscape. And so, as you said, they were very tied for me from the beginning. I think what I decided to do, because I wanted to use the landscape that I'm so familiar with, this, I think, in its essence, is a book about what it means to belong. And, you know, I think at home, in my hometown, there have been times when I felt a lot of very intense belonging, and some other times when I felt like I didn't belong at all. So setting it in that town felt like I gave myself some skin in the game, you know, to make it really feel real and earned. But you're right, I think you can get very close to those things, and then you sort of meandering around in your own memories, and it ends up being something that's for you but isn't really for an audience. So what I did was I took the characters and I just made them nothing like me. I think that goes a long way when you have, and that's where you get the separation is, you know, each of the characters started in a very specific place. You know, there's three brothers. The middle brother, for example, when I started with him, I said, I want him to be afraid of heights. He's like so into being a roofer and he really wants to do it, but he is scared when he gets up there. And that's different because My father, I'll tell you, this guy will climb up on a roof like it's nobody's business. And he's just, I mean, he makes it look like the easiest thing. Now, when I climb up like on my counter in the kitchen, I'm getting woozy and I can't do it. So my dad is like, how are you my daughter? Like, but so kind of creating a character that is very different in that way. And then, you know, the older brother, Baylor, where I started with him is, you know, I wanted somebody who kind of every time he came into a room, he would be like, what the F? You know, so, so that was like where I started with him. And I think when you start with something like that, then you can kind of build out something that makes me smile and makes me think like, this is a person, if I knew them in real life, I would just cherish them. And when you know that, then you can kind of give them like, oh, but they're kind of, you know, wishy-washy, maybe don't have a backbone, or maybe they're a little bit too abrupt. And then slowly that's how you kind of build out the character. So a lot of the time that I spent was just thinking about who are these people that I don't actually know, but I wanted to come across that, you know, I know them. And then in terms of research, what I like to do, I don't know about you, I don't like research. I feel like it feels unproductive, even though I know that it is and it's important, but any day that I spend working and I don't have actual words or pages written, I'm like, what did I even do today? So I will usually save research for the end when I've got sort of my main plot points. It doesn't always work that way, but so at this point I had, you know, most of the book written, and I needed to be able to ask my dad, like, I don't want to get some of the key roofing things wrong in the book. I don't want, you know, him and my brother to read it and like, what is this? So when the book was done and it had sold and I kind of had a plan, I sat down with my dad and I said, okay, you know, the beginning of this book, they find something in an attic. And he had told me this story. This was years ago, but in our hometown, there's a Presbyterian church and has this really nice steeple with a bell tower. And he told me this story about being hired to go up in there and fix, you know, it was leaking, to fix it. And he has this great story about, you know, getting up in there and he opens the hatch. He's like back in the counting room where they keep all the money. He opens his hatch and all these bats fly in his face. And then they're all out in a sanctuary and they're like, do we get a BB gun? Like, how do we get rid of these bats? And, you know, when he told me that, I just thought that would be a great beginning for a novel. So that's also in the book, you know, was from my dad. And then he ended up drawing me a picture of, okay, here's where the steeple is. And, you know, this is sort of what it looked like. Here's probably how much it would cost to patch a roof back in 1992 or whatever. So my dad and my brother were probably the main sources of research when I just wanted to get little things right. And it was funny though, because they disagreed about things, about what something should cost and how they go about fixing it. So that I think is pretty realistic too, that they didn't always agree on what should be done.
That scene, which happens early on, is such a great example of how, you know, it's about the action of what's happening, but Baylor and Waylon, these two brothers, from their reactions to the bats flying in the face and all the things that are happening in that church, we just get such a sense of who they are emotionally. You can see them physically, the different ways they move in this scene. It's just such a great portrait of who they are individually and with and playing off of each other. Mm-hmm. Speaking of which, you mentioned that this is a book about what it means to belong or to feel like you don't belong in the place where you belong. It's not only about the town, though, it's also about belonging or not belonging in a family.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I think, you know, when you were talking before, one of the interesting things about this family in particular is that they are together all the time. They live together, they work together, and they have built this business. And that business is a roofing business, and the success or the failure of it becomes sort of a proxy for emotion in the family, for truth in the family. So when they should be having honest conversations with each other, they're talking about roofing, or they're going up on the roof, or they're doing those sort of things. So what ends up happening over the course of 10 years is that they're all so committed to each other, and they're together day in and day out, and they're making this business work, which is very hard. I'm sure there are some small business owners in the room here, and you know, it is kind of like a paycheck to paycheck kind of thing sometimes. They put everything they have into that, thinking that this is what it means to love each other, this is what it means to care for one another. But then, you know, when they find this thing in the attic, things start to unravel, and they see that really what has happened is that they put all their eggs in the wrong basket, and asking themselves, can I be a son or a brother without this thing? Do we exist as a family without this scaffolding of the business? And they each start to ask themselves questions about, if we didn't have this, what are we? And it feels for them at the time like maybe they're trying to save each other and they're failing, but I think that there's something in that failure that helps them find the real bond that is holding them together. So it's this idea of sort of you have to go back to go forward, you have to break down to build up. And that is what, for them, it means to be in a family, is that they, are together but maybe not honest, and together but maybe don't feel loved.
And then we have Marley, who is the wife that Waylon is avoiding in that opening scene. And then we go back in time and we get to see her meeting not only him, but the whole family at once. And this is an interesting, for a central romance storyline, normally in a book I expect to, have the couple meet and then eventually they integrate their families. She meets the whole family at once. And it's not that she falls in love with him, she falls in love with this family.
Yeah.
Can you talk about her sense of belonging and being an outsider and all of that in this novel?
Absolutely. Marley was such a fun character to write. What I did with her was I took some of my favorite characteristics about some of my friends from home and I, put them all in this, she's not afraid to wade into somebody else's mess. She's honest in a loving way. She's very creative and wants to build something of her own. When she comes into this family, it is absolutely a love story, but it's not necessarily, there's definitely the romance kind, but there's a lot, she falls in love with what it means to actually be a member of a large family. Her background is that she and her mom moved from Ohio. They sort of move around a lot. And what I wanted to play with also is this idea of like the fact that just because a family is traditional, meaning there's two parents, kids, does not mean that it's healthy. And in a lot of ways, her family model, where it's just her and her mom, is a lot healthier than what the Josephs has built. So in 1990, there's sort of this generally accepted vision of what it means to be a family, but then you also have like this real version of what it means to be a family, which is what she has with her mom. But because she's not afraid of other people's mess and mistakes and whatever, she kind of jumps in with both feet into this family, and then because she thinks they're perfect at the beginning, and then it doesn't take long for that illusion to be squashed. But at that point, she has loved the idea of having a possible mother-in-law. Her husband, Waylon, also has a younger brother named Shay, who she adores. So it's kind of, she becomes, I think, a family member before she even marries into it. And I don't know, I think for small towns, it's pretty common to, when you know somebody, you know everything about them. You know their grandmother's maiden name. You know where the burial plots are in the cemetery. I mean, so when you know somebody, it is sort of like you become very linked very quickly, and there's really no undoing it.
Yeah, that also coming from a small town, that felt very real to me. As did the role of the church in this book. I mean, it's Sunday morning. Can we talk about faith?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, there's many people from my wonderful church community here, so absolutely.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So not only do we begin with a pivotal scene in a church attic, happens very soon. It's where some literal secrets are held, let alone, it's a small town, so therefore churches are an integral part of this community and the characters' lives. And the characters are an integral part of the church community, so we get to see sort of their public roles there, which are slightly different from their family roles, sometimes are intertwined. But then also, besides the institution of the church, you have characters dealing with their own questions of faith.
Yeah.
In a God, in their family members, in various ways we can think about faith there. Can you talk about constructing that and how you, as human beings, we're constantly questioning our own, and redeveloping our own relationship with faith and what that means. How do you do that for all these characters in such a real way? And what role did that play for you? And where were you going with that? How did this become a central thing?
I think pretty much from the beginning, I wanted to write about a bunch of characters who want to have faith, but they're not particularly religious. They don't love church. They don't quite understand what the purpose of it is, but there's something in each of them that says, I wonder if there's something larger or more important out there, and I think they're each kind of trying to reckon with it in their own way. And I wanted to include that. I mean, faith is a huge part of my life, and it's a huge part of my writing life as well. I think of my own writing as a place of like prayer for me because I don't censor myself. I let myself say whatever it is that I want. A lot of times might be things, or I think things that might not be okay to say in church, but I feel like is where my best writing comes from, is sort of thinking through what have I felt that maybe feels like it's not okay to feel, and to sort of build a story around that. So for these characters in particular, I think at the beginning of the book, they're looking at maybe like religion, whatever that is, or faith, and they're seeing it as this series of closed doors. You can't do this, you can't do that, this is bad, this is bad. But then hopefully over the course of the book, that what faith means to them is those doors start to open, and you say, I can actually walk through this, I can be honest, I can be myself. And God sees that and isn't intimidated by that, and loves me just as I am. I wanted to give characters that sense of like, it's okay to just come as you are, and if that, there's lots of churches where that's not really what they mean. They have open doors, but it's not really come as you are. And so I wanted these characters to really be able to experience that. But they have to learn everything the hard way. That's a great thing to do in a book. All the characters learn everything the hard way. So that's kind of what they go through to get there. And sometimes that means not going to church for a little bit, and that's okay too. So all of my books have faith in it in some way, because it's such an important part of my life. But I like taking those sort of like boundaries that we have and pressing against it and say, is this boundary really necessary? So that's what a lot happens in this book, is they're kind of pressing through the boundaries and saying, like, what exists on the other side of this?
And as you're talking about that, it makes me think about what they're searching for in each other, the
Yes.
characters,
Yes.
outside of their faith, is
Mhm.
that sense of, can I come to you as I am?
Yes.
Right? Shay and Marley, Waylon and Marley, she's central to that for a lot of
Yes.
them. And also, you're dealing in this novel with a lot of expectations. Here are gendered expectations of who you're going to be. Here are your family expectations, community expectations, and how much can I push against those boundaries or not?
Exactly. And I think there's something about this question. When you love somebody, does that mean, okay, let me fix you? Is that what it means to love somebody? Let me fix you? Or is it, I accept you as you are? Now listen, I don't know the answer to that question. And that's like usually when I write a book, I'm sort of like raising a larger question, and I try not to answer it, but maybe to sort of like pick apart that question and really consider it. But that's, I think, a huge thing of all these characters are asking themselves, I love you and I'd like to fix you, is that okay? And most of the time it doesn't work out, yeah.
Which is actually something I was going to ask you about what questions you were following into this novel. Because they're the questions we know we're writing about at the start, and then they're the ones that reveal themselves along the way. And sometimes I have found, when a book is published, I realize what I was exploring there.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you could talk about questions you knew you were exploring, questions that surprised you, what this book was about to you that it may or may not be to the reader.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, when you mentioned, I was like, oh my goodness, Cinderland came out 9 years ago. Still, I'm thinking about that book and why I wrote it and what it means now versus what it meant then. It's sort of seeing it take on a life of its own, and you kind of get separate from it. Makes you sort of look back not only at the project, but the person you were when you wrote it. And writing a book changes you. Publishing that book changes you to sort of like see your trajectory and its trajectory kind of go off. Every time I revisit it, I think, I think I got something new out of that, When I started this book, I thought, I want to write a book about what it might be like if a family tries to save each other and they fail, which I've mentioned a few times. So that was sort of like that opening question for me. What might it mean if all the things they try do not work? Then what, right? That was sort of what guided me through most of the revisions. And I think, I don't know, it still is very close to me, and the book just came out, so I'm still processing, especially as, people who know me are reading it and having thoughts about it. I still think that it is sort of about that idea of, can we really remain a family if, we disagree, or, I don't know, I'd be curious when you read it, if there was something you thought was, sort of a central question What do you think?
Well, there are so many things, but one thing I kept thinking about, we talked when Shiner came out about how both Shiner and Cinderland explore in very different ways the intertwined topics of secrets and allowing space for grief.
Yes.
And to me, as a reader, you're absolutely exploring that territory, again, in new and interesting ways. In Mercury, I found multiple subtle and satisfying ways that it felt to me as a reader like these books are all in conversation with one another, which made me curious about the through lines or conversations you see in your work, and whether you think about that when you're drafting or revising, or if that's only something you think about when pushed to do so in an interview.
You know, I think I've done it both ways. Sometimes I feel like if I have too much of a good idea of where I'm going when I start, it usually doesn't pan out. I'll get about 30 to 50 pages in and it just kind of goes, pew, you know. But looking back, when I think about my 3 books, a question that I end up always exploring, and I don't know if I'll always stick with this or not, but I feel like there's always a crime that's committed, and I don't necessarily think of myself as a crime writer, but there's a crime that's committed, but it's not considered a crime because it happened to a woman. So that ends up, even though that's not in a question form, it feels like a constant question in my life that continues to come up creatively. And I think also another question that sort of is related, at least in regard to Mercury, is sort of like, what does it look like to be a woman in this very male-driven family and male-driven industry? Because, you know, my mom worked in my dad's business, my aunt, my sister-in-law, and they end up oftentimes sort of being the person that's like, I will handle payroll, I'm going to figure out insurance, like all these things, because their husbands are literally fixing roofs all day. You know, it's not like the husband is like sitting back, eating popcorn, whatever, like everybody is working hard. But I did ask myself, what does it mean to be a woman when you feel like you don't have a lot of choices? Because, you know, women that I know that are in these quote unquote blue collar communities, they're not like Rosie the Riveter. They are entrepreneurs and homemakers all at once. You know, they take on a job usually without pay or without a title. They take on full responsibility for childcare, and they don't complain or question it. And I thought, what if we put somebody in there like Marley who does question it? What happens then? You know? So I think I wanted to show not only sort of like the cascading cost of that lack of choice throughout a generation, but I also didn't want it to be a cautionary tale. These women are not cautionary tales. They very much find their own way, and I think there's a lot to celebrate in that. So I think, yeah, now that we're sort of talking about it, I do think like, what does it mean to be a woman in this kind of family? Like, what does that look like? I think that was something that I wanted to explore, because it felt, you know, it was very real to me, seeing the women in my life do it, and also to say, you know, when I read about, like I said, women who maybe come from blue collar communities, they never look like the kind of women that I know and knew.
And in this novel, it's so interesting because the women are thinking about that question a lot. What is it to be me, and what's expected of me, and the other, they're watching each other too in these ways, and finding each other and moving apart from each other. I feel like this is mixing the metaphor, because now I'm building a wall, not a roof, but it's like the men are the bricks, and the women are the cement. They are holding it together, but they are also taking up much less space in the men's mind, but then also they're going in these cracks and forming these connections and reaching each other in these ways almost around the men. I feel like the men are not thinking about the women, or what they're doing in this novel for the most part, and the women are moving around and finding each other. And then some of those bricks also don't necessarily want to stay a brick, right? They are also forced in this rigid shape of what they're expected to be and all of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think for Marley in particular, one of the main characters, she's wondering, like, what does it mean for me to be a mom? She's got this one picture of what it means to be a mom, and her mother-in-law, which is like very much like, I'm doing things by the book, we're all unhappy, and you're gonna get bored with it, you know? And then her mother, who's a little bit more fluid, that is kind of like, listen, like, we've got one life to live, we're not gonna sweat the small stuff. So she's kind of looking at two options and wondering, and she floats kind of back and forth between them, and really what she has to find is her own path forward.
And Ruth, her mother, has some of the, best moments in this book, even though she's not on the page all that much, but she says something about you've got to find your own center and hold fast to it.
Yes.
And it was just like, yes, Marley, you do.
Yes. Yeah. A lot of those lines that Ruth has, who's Marley's mother, are things that I think I wish somebody had been there to say to me when I was really having a hard time, when I was stuck and I didn't see a way out. I've thought many times, what do I wish someone had told me? And those were the lines that I gave to Ruth.
But which is interesting, because you think of, when I say that, if you haven't read the book yet, you might think, oh, that must come at the end. But actually, Ruth is most present in the beginning, where all of this mess is happening, and Marley is, maybe not choosing all of the things that her mother would have her choose. And so we get to have that wisdom in those moments where you still get to mess up. It's not, here's how we're smoothing over how you messed up. It's okay.
Yeah.
You've got several paths to choose now coming from this choice.
Yeah.
And where are we going? And you can still have that calming voice as we go. It's not just the voice that fixes things for her or something. It's almost,
that's so true.
let's move forward through this mess, even with that wisdom in our ears. I don't know. I love that.
Listen, by the way, I'm still a work in progress. Like when I think, I'm like, oh, I hope that's what I would love to be as a mom, and I hope I'm learning that. Yeah.
Speaking of works in progress,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, I got to read an early draft of this novel.
Yes.
And reading the finished book was so much fun because I got to notice all of these smaller and larger ways that you expanded and complicated the story and the characters and the relationships and the storyline. But as you alluded to, this book started as one thing and it stayed that thing.
Yeah.
You had that clear vision from the front. So all these ways that you deepened it were just to make it more fully and deeply itself. And that was great to see in several firsts. Can you talk about the revision process for this book and how you approached it? I know it wasn't the same as your revision process for some of your other novels, and that you had to do a lot of trusting your gut, and I'm just wondering how you tap into that and know what it's saying and how to listen to it.
Yeah, I think one of the first things that you said to me that was really important was that this book knows what it is. And that was really different from any of my other projects, because I will oftentimes get very close to the end and it's still like, what is this book really about? So usually the process is super, super messy for me. But what this book required, because it was like I had a beginning, a middle, and an end, what I realized is that in that first draft, I hadn't done service to what each of the characters really deserved. So most of what I did when I was rewriting and rethinking was, trying to make sure no character got written off. There's pretty much everybody in the book does something that is pretty unlikable. So what I wanted to do is say, everybody gets a second shot, everybody gets to tell their side of the story. So a lot of it was me thinking through, like, if I really sat down with a person who had been through this and they had a different perspective from everybody, what would it look like? What would it mean if you have a brother and they have this moment of triumph, and that moment of triumph is also like your deepest loss? Like, what would that really feel like? So a lot of it was mostly character development, and this is it's a character-driven book, so that's where I ended up spending most of my time, was making these people feel real, and also when they do things that we hate as readers, that you can they can find a way to work their way back that feels earned.
What were you reading as you thought about this? Or what books or TV shows, other pieces of art do you hope that this book is in conversation with?
Interestingly, this was one project. Usually I will have like a stack of books that I'm thinking about, and in my head I'm sort of talking with. This was one where it's like the things and the people that I were talking with were people from my life. So my two grandparents who have passed, I had a lot of conversations with them in my head. So it was a lot of just voices in my head from growing up and that kind of thing. But what I did do, and something I love to do when I write books, is to make a playlist. I spent way too much time on making a playlist on Spotify, but that was sort of like how I set the vibe. When I'm writing, I'm always like, what's the vibe? What's the vibe? So I have a playlist for each of my books, and that's what I listen to on repeat. And it is like, so when I was thinking about the characters, I gave each of them a favorite song, like Marley loves Dangerous by Roxette. Baylor Want You to Think That He Loves Pour Some Sugar on Me by Def Leppard, but he really loves November Rain by Guns N' Roses. Like, that's the level that I went to, you know. So each character, I sort of was like, what is their favorite song? What do they listen to when they're happy? What do they listen to when they're sad? Like, what is on the radio when they're in the hair salon and they're just chatting, that kind of thing. And that built out the world for me a little bit, because when I play music from those years, it gives me instant feelings. I mean, probably am I even naming those songs? You're like, oh yeah. So a lot of what I did during that time was I just listened to music from 1990 to 1999, and it would just bring these things up. You know, I listened to a lot of like Janet Jackson, the If album. I don't know if that's the title, but yeah. So I have a whole playlist of songs that I like got deep into, and I would just listen to it on repeat because it would take me to a certain place and a certain mood, and the more I could do that, I could sort of like make you feel it in the book, so that when you read it, you're getting that feeling.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I can also feel that even though their favorite songs are not on the page, you know your characters in a way that you understand
Yes.
that about them. Like,
Yes.
that comes through.
Absolutely.
You talked about, you started this talking about sort of rising yourself back up from a feeling of failure with a previous book that wasn't doing well, and writing this for yourself and pumping yourself up with a playlist, which, by the way, can we find those playlists on your website? Do you share them?
Yes, it's on, if you go to my website, and under Mercury, if you go to the bottom, it'll say listen to the playlist here, and there's a link. I'm trying to, I'll add it to my Instagram as well, but it is on my website for sure, yeah.
Do you have
Super fun.
other ways that you just prepare yourself to write and to do the repeated showing up day after day, sometimes years-long work of getting through a novel?
I will say, there's good days and bad, you know, there really is. There's days, I think I have to remind myself, and I'm going through this right now, I have to remind myself that it always feels like it's probably not going to work out. These things that you're working on, it always feels like this is a huge risk. You feel like, you know, I might be committing another 2 to 5 years in something that doesn't work out. So I think managing that emotion and sort of like, that's a big part for me, for sort of saying like, you know, this might not work out, but it might. That's like the hard thing. I have to sort of get to that part. It's like, but it might, and it might be worth it. So a lot of it is sort of like self-talk. I will say though, it is my favorite thing to sit in my bed with my pencil and my notebook and write. That is, for me, the best experiences that I've had as a writer and an author who is published are in my bed with my notebook. So that is, I think, why I keep doing it, is that I enjoy that process so much. Now, when it's not going well, which is often, I feel like I'm a failure, what am I doing? I should get a job, you know. But those moments where I'm sitting and I feel like I've written something real and true that feels beautiful to me, they're so meaningful. And then you just feel like, oh, like this is why I do this, because there's something like here that feels real that makes me be a more present and loving human in the real world. Because we spend so much of our time in these things that like we create that are actually real, you know? That if it is something that I feel like I can take the strength from this, or if I can take the joy from this and actually apply it to like who I am as a wife, a sister, a mom, a friend, that's why I do it.
You're amazing.
Oh, listen, you're all getting like, you know, top shelf Amy Jo. There's lots of other shelves, okay?
I have a million more questions.
Yeah.
As you know, could talk to you all day, and I will if they don't have questions, but I do want to open it up to the audience if there are things that you'd like to ask.
Sure.
There's a microphone that we can circulate. You can raise your hand.
And I will say, as we're getting the microphone set up, if you have young readers in your family, in you know, people that you love, Anika writes such wonderful, she's got picture books that are fantastic. She's got early reader chapter books. She's got a really great, you know, that's called Hide and Seek. That's, you know, kind of spooky for Halloween. So if you're looking for something that your young one or a young person in your life will love, her books are fantastic. We love them in our house.
Thank you, and you
Yeah.
have talked me through all the pieces of the process of all of them. So any of them would not.
You know, you
exist
write, you know,
without-
you write books sort of by yourself, but you need a person
You
that you
need a partner and a yes.
listen to all my problems. So thank you for being that for me.
Thank
Love
you for being there. And we have a question.
Yeah, hi. Hi, thank you so much for doing this. This is awesome.
Of course.
So I'm an emerging fiction writer,
Yeah.
like we spoke. So I'm wondering about the publishing process because that's a whole life
Yeah.
in itself, right? So could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, there are many different paths to publication, so I'll tell you the one that I took, which is I wrote something called a query letter, which is basically a one-page pitch of yourself and the book that you wrote. You send it to a bunch of agents, and you hope somebody requests to look at your manuscript, and then eventually, hopefully, somebody will want to represent you. An agent will represent you to different editors at publishing houses. That process can be super quick, and you can find an agent, in a month or less, or it can take much longer. A lot of people work at it for years. I think it took me maybe 6 months to a year to find somebody, and then basically you work on revisions with that agent, and then they send your book out to a ton of editors. And then hopefully somebody will want to purchase it, and then you work on it. Mostly it's edits. It's all edits, and then you get another voice in there who says, well, let's make this change. And then they pick a pub date. Oftentimes this whole process from like when you sell it to when you publish it, it can be a year. It can be 2 years. I mean, I think Shiner sold in 2017, didn't come out till 2020. That felt super long. So it kind of depends on, you have to kind of get slotted in a publication schedule, which there's a lot of things that are outside your control that contribute to that. But is that answering like the specifics of your question?
Yeah, thank you.
But again, like if it's, lots of people don't go the agent route, and you can submit directly to smaller publishers. The thing I like about an agent is like, they're good at their jobs. So if you can find somebody that you trust and who has integrity, you can handle the creative stuff, and they can sort of like steer the ship a bit for you. There's lots of complications and ins and outs of that, but that's like, at its best, that's hopefully how it works.
It's nice to have a partner in the process.
Yes, absolutely.
See other hands up, there's
Yeah.
them in the back.
Hi, Amy.
I know.
Hello. Hello. What do you do when you're getting feedback from people that, like maybe from your hometown or something?
Yeah.
And you're like, well, that's not right, and you should have done this, or, do you ever talk about or propose the idea of like giving it to people from your hometown or roofers or something like that?
It's tricky, and I know some writers who like to get feedback before they publish. I am somebody who, I would rather live and die by what I wrote and not make anybody else responsible for it. There's something nice about having a finished product and a book that you can hold in your hand, and when you give that to somebody who's in your family, I think it means like a little bit more. And it's not just some Word doc that you're like, look at this thing I wrote, And I think it also helps me sort of get to a place where I say, okay, I've written this book, it's separate from me, it's mine, but it's not me necessarily. So if somebody has thoughts about it or opinions, I can sort of like process it in a hopefully fruitful way. Now listen, like when I get feedback from people, it's like usually I panic and then I despair, and then I'm able to sort of be like, okay, like maybe, we can talk about it. So that's kind of what I have done. I mean, also my books are, I like to paint things of like people at their breaking points, and I think when you do that, it's like people are gonna have feelings about it. And so I kind of have to get myself into a space where I'm like, okay, like it is important to me that I'm present with whoever read this, that we can talk about it. But for me to get there, it kind of has to be done. Yeah.
This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this. You mentioned this book was different from your first two because you were able to write it from beginning to end, almost like a fully realized scene. Can you talk more about how Cinderland and Shiner differed for you in terms of writing process?
Absolutely. For those two books, pretty much what I did was I wrote in my notebook, so that was the same, but I didn't write anything in order. So what I would have was just like scene, some from beginning, some from the end. It was sort of more like a, process where you're trying to remember something, but you don't have all the pieces. And so if you were to look at my first draft, it would not be in any kind of interesting order. There were things that were complete sentences. It was just images. So those felt a little bit more like making a quilt, if that makes sense. And sort of like you have all these pieces and you assemble them, and then you can like reorganize them and move them around and say, okay, now which is the most interesting final project. And with Shiner in particular, something I wanted to do with that book is not tell it in order. I wanted it to sort of work backward. So most of the work with those books was trying to find the right order to give information. With Mercury, it's sort of, I had the right order. What I really needed to do was like add the depth to it. So, and I much prefer that, I have to be honest. I feel like I'm not gonna write another book that was like this clean cut, and I'm a little scared. Because it's very messy to be moving those pieces and say, oh, maybe I should put this back, maybe, I don't know. But you process it, I mean, you know, it is what it is, so you can't change it, but that's kind of how they were different.
So I had this question, like you have a couple of characters, right? So how did you, make this character have these kind of responses? Because, people are alike most of the time, and sometimes people are quick to respond, and sometimes they have same kind of view, but, people say it out loud faster. How did you, how do you say it? Like perfect one character, not having conflict with other ones.
That's such a great question, and I think usually what happens with me when I'm writing a book is that I sort of see things, but I mostly hear them. So a lot of where books start with me is I'm overhearing conversations, which sounds a little weird, but that's kind of what it is. Just sort of hearing conversations of characters talking with each other, that kind of thing. What I like to do, I find it very difficult to sort of jump from one character to another. I like to sort of write a big chunk from one character, because then not only you as the writer really get into their mindset, but I think the reader does too. There's lots of writers who are really able to switch back and forth very easily. I can't really do that. So I like to spend a lot of time with one character, so I really get to know what their voice sounds like in my head, and then that's kind of how so it's a lot of like just imagining what they sound like. I think Joanne had a question, and maybe Evelyn.
I don't have a question.
Okay, yep, I got you. So yeah, I got you.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joanne.
So, I had you as a teacher at least 10 years ago.
Yep.
And I remember when I would submit something, all those obsessive little notes that you used to write. And they were so great. I want to see what a manuscript looks like, a written manuscript. It's probably all the same way, right?
It is my manuscripts. What I'll do, so I'll type it up after I have my written draft, and then I go through and I did exactly what, when students submit work to me, just writing things in margins, that's exactly how I edit. So I have a lot of past manuscripts that you'll see the typewritten, and then it is covered with my notes.
I hope you're going to save them for that posterity that will want to see them.
Oh, there might be evidence of some, I don't know. But yeah, I have them because it kind of, I like looking at them too to sort of see, but I do have them. I think they're under my bed. So I think that's the question.
Hi, Amy.
Hi.
When did you discover your love of writing? At what age did you realize?
I think I have always loved writing pretty much because I love reading so much. And I remember being, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 and writing a whole bunch of things. And then as you get older, I think one of the things that was like pretty prevalent when I was young was, you gotta have a job that's gonna pay the bills, which is a completely reasonable, expectation. But by the time I got to high school, I think what we were studying in high school was all books that were written by dead white dudes, which are great, don't get me wrong. But you're like, who even writes books anymore? You know what I mean? So I think I didn't think it was a possibility. And then after, I went to college and I was working a corporate job for a few years. I just got to the point where I said, you know what, I just need to try. I don't want to get to a point in my life and I look back and I say, I never tried. So it just started with me being like, let me just try. And that meant, we saved some money and lived very frugally for quite a few years. And that's sort of, the side of it that's important. And I had a very, very supportive life partner in that, which has been really wonderful. But that was sort of, let me just try, so, yeah.
How did you, why did you name it Mercury?
Mm-hmm. Oh, so I had such a hard time with the title of this book. all I kept calling it in my mind was the roofer novel. And I couldn't come up with a good title. And I finally had a friend be like, you have to stop calling it that, the roofer novel. So I went through a whole bunch of different titles, and I didn't like any of them. The truth was, and then you know what it was? This isn't a very exciting story, but my editor picked it. She said, how about Mercury? And then I said, ooh, okay. And then it was interesting because my original title, the one that I think I sent the draft to you with, it was a first draft, it was called In the Land of Mercury. And then Anika had said, you know, that title feels a little bit science fiction-y. And I was like, oh, it does. So, but then, so it was my editor, Deb, who said, we went through, I'm not kidding you, like it was at least 50 titles.
I thought it was Ann Sons at one point.
So when it sold, it was called Ann Sons. So in the book, the roofing company is called Joseph Ann Sons, and my dad's roofing company was called Burns and Sons. Was it? J.A. Burns and Sons. So, it's had a lot of different names as well. But so we thought this idea, Ann Sons, would work really well. Turns out it's a great title, and another book already had it. So thankfully, my editor, Deb, and it's really nice to have other people that you trust giving you feedback about your ideas. So that's how it landed on it.
So is there like something called Mercury in the book?
It's the town. It's the name of the town. Yeah.
Okay, that's the name of the town. That's a great, great question. Do we have one final question from you to wrap it up, Anika?
What challenge are you chasing in your writing next?
The challenge that I'm chasing is committing to what I want my next project to be. I've got 3 different things, and they all have potential and they all have problems. And like I said, I'm trying to remind myself that most of it feels like you don't know what you're doing until you do. So I'm like in that phase of unknowing right now and trying to like work through it. So there's lots of things in progress, but you never really know till you know. And I hate that. I'm so impatient. I chose a terrible career to be somebody who's so impatient. But there we are.
I believe in you.
Oh, and I believe in you. Thank you.
And I think right now what you should be doing is basking in the success of Mercury. So we're going to start wrapping this up. Just to close it out, I did want to share one of the things. So as has been shared, there's a long-standing friendship between Mika and Amy Jo. And as I was preparing for this, I was remembering that 4 years ago, this April 15th, 2020, the library came online with our very first ever virtual event. It was March 15th, 2020 that the library had to close down to COVID. And we had Amy Jo booked to come and do an event for Shiner, which had just come out, and all her other events had been canceled. And so she had this wonderful novel coming out and nowhere to go with it, as a lot of authors found themselves in those pandemic years. And so, you had Love, Sophia on the Moon coming up. We were gonna have Amy Jo and Mika in conversation, so that also makes us feel very full circle that we finally have this event happening in this way. But so I had this commitment, okay, their event was going to be April 15th, we're going to pivot, and we're going to make this be a virtual event. And it was the first of hundreds of virtual events. And they hung with me. We did it on a platform called Crowdcast. None of us knew what we were doing. We had all these tests. We were figuring it out on the fly as we went. We were going to make this happen. And I don't think your internet, Amy Jo, one of you had an unstable internet connection.
It was probably me.
Yeah. It was you.
It was me. Yeah.
But we made it work. It's still on our YouTube channel. It's the very, very first video. So we have a YouTube channel for the library, Princeton PL, and then within that we have different playlists. And so it's the very first video on our books and authors playlist, and I love that. Now you're here kicking off 2024, which we have a great author event season coming up. And it just, I don't know, this just feels, I'm just so happy that this happened this way. So we are going to move to the book signing portion of our event, and Amy Jo will sign books. Now, I will also want to say we have a happy problem here. In that Labyrinth ordered a couple boxes of books for the book signing, but then the book got reviewed in the New York Times, as I said, the People's Pick, Barnes & Noble Pick, and the books flew out of Labyrinth doors in the last couple of days to the point that we do not have probably enough books for this book signing. Many people have already bought them, so we're going to run short. So what we're going to do instead as well is if you don't get a book, is that Labyrinth can take your prepayment for a book, and Amy Jo has agreed to go to the store and personalize and sign your copy, and then you can just drop by Labyrinth when they're ready. So Labyrinth has got some more on order. They'll know how many to order, plus probably an extra bit for the sales tables. So we'll have a sheet here. You can tell Amy how to personalize it, and then Amy will go to the store, sign them, personalize them, and then the store will email or call you, and you can just drop by Labyrinth at your pleasure to pick up the book, because we are going to run out of copies at the rate that they're selling, which is a happy problem to have. That all the books went flying out the shelves. I think people were getting ready for the snow on Thursday and Friday. The book came out anyways. It's great. Thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody for coming out on this Sunday morning for our first book brunch. Stay tuned for many more to come, including, I know in March we're going to have Adele Waldman here for The Help, which is also getting a lot of buzz. I'm trying to remember what else we have coming. There's a lot. But I know that's going to be one of our book brunches coming up. It's on my mind because I'm just finished reading the arc of that. So, okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.